Hello, it's Steve, and I am here with Elizabeth Nader. Welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Very honored to be here. Thank you for asking me.
You are very welcome, and the honor is mine. As you know, I have a gallery of freedom fighters with interviews, and I'm referring to you as a freedom fighter. Can you relate to that term? Do you consider yourself one?
I can relate to that. It's an interesting term because the first part of it, freedom, is a very uplifting, positive, resonates with my DNA. And fighter, depending on the day, can sound like, let's go and put on some Rocky music. And some other days, let's be honest, makes it sounds tiring, and it can be tiring. You have to be honest about that process. It's not always a great day, but it's all collectively an incredible experience. So yes, I will resonate with the freedom fighter.
Good. What's tiring about it?
When you fight for something that matters, when you fight for something that has almost eternal consequences, it's consequential, the resistance is strong. When you're fighting for something that's worthwhile, resistance really picks up. And a lot of times you'll say, why am I getting this resistance? It's either from people or from situations. And the answer is either, well, you're doing the wrong thing or you're doing the right thing. It's not obvious, right? It's not always obvious. But I think 9 times out of 10, when you consistently see resistance and in your heart that you're following your beliefs, your principles, your morals, and you're fighting for something that's bigger than you, that resistance is there to keep you from moving forward. And sadly, the resistance can often come in people. I don't believe we fight, flesh and blood. We really fight sort of spiritual forces in people. And so there's a force in this world that's dark and that wants destruction and is against freedom, is against individuality and against the image of God. And that darkness doesn't like the light that's in you or the light that's in me. And so sometimes that resistance comes through what we think are other people, but often it's just that spiritual battle. And, it can be tiring. You have to know what you're fighting for. You have to know why it matters. And you have to be willing to sacrifice. And I think, for me, and I shared this with you before, a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, which means my family fought in the Revolutionary War. And it's been a big deal in our family. Our family is full of historians and, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, it's all kind of a big thing. So it's important to my family, and it very much feels stamped on my DNA, this sense of the divine founding of this country and the sacrifices that were put forth in order to create it. And when we look at that and we look at the choices people made, it wasn't just the founding fathers, it was the everyday person who stood up against the superpower of the world, right? Who sacrificed life and limb and reputation and finances and a future and so many things that it's hard sometimes to understand. But that sacrifice, because victory requires it. And you must endure some level of sacrifice in order to get to the other side of anything worth fighting for. So the answer is long, Steve, but I think that it's part of the process in order to really invest in something that matters for the future. And that's what we're doing, is we're trying to protect what we've been given for future generations.
Hmm. You mentioned as a daughter of the American Revolution, do you consider your forebears to also have been fighting these dark forces? In their eyes, were they fighting dark forces?
Oh, I definitely believe that. I firmly believe that we have strong Judeo-Christian roots, and that means that the men and women who founded this country had these spiritual beliefs, Judeo-Christian beliefs. And I think if you look into Judeo-Christian beliefs, you see this understanding that there is a spiritual battle, and that is very much part of the process. Do I think that there were dark forces against the country of America being founded? Absolutely. Whenever there's a force for good, there's a force for evil trying to stop it. And if we look at America, what I believe is God's gift to this world. That doesn't mean that we're better than anyone. It doesn't mean that in any way he said, well, I'm only going to bless you. But I believe what he said is, I need to give the world a gift of protection, a gift of inspiration, a gift of people who model by fighting for what's right, a gift of freedom being modeled, and the individuality that I put into everybody being protected, and showing the way in a dark world, and showing the way of how you create opportunity, and giving everybody equal opportunity, not equal outcome, but equal opportunity, because it's sort of the essence of who we are as humans, is to want for that. So I do think when a good gift is given to the world, yes, there is a dark force opposing it. So do I think that my relatives, that the founders, that all the people that I consider founders, not just the founding fathers, it's the farmer and his wife and the kid who sacrificed, it's all of them, it's the preachers who stood in their pulpits and cried for freedom. Do I think they saw that? Yes, I do. And in fact, I'll take it to the next level, Steve. I do not believe this country could have been founded without divine intervention. I do not believe that it makes any sense that a rough militia who sort of turned into an army, who wasn't really well funded by the Congress of the time and came up against so many challenges. Do I think that on paper makes sense to beat the superpower of the world? Not at all. Doesn't make any sense. It's really a David and Goliath story. And while that's inspiring, and it truly is, you have to understand the other forces at work. God, I believe, intended for this country. You know that our country gives more money outside of our country. We're the most philanthropic. We are the most mission focused. We are the most compassionate country when you look just at what we do financially to help others. There are things like that this world needed. And I believe that's how God provided for it through America.
Is God still as active today as he was several hundred years ago when the country was founded?
My theology, my beliefs is God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He doesn't change. So the degree to which he's interested in your life and my life, and the direction of this country and the direction of the world, and all the people in this world that he created, that he loves us all equally, no matter our choices. Yes. Yes, I believe he is. But that gets into a whole theology discussion, doesn't it? Of what does that mean? He's not a puppet master. God gave us free will, which is fascinating because it's sort of, in many ways, the essence of who we are as a country. We have laws that are morally based, but there is this essence of free will, right? Which is a freedom to determine one's future within the bounds of what is moral. So yes, he's still as active. He's still the same God. The circumstances are changing. It doesn't surprise him. He knows the beginning from the end. But he still wants for us to fight for what is good. So he's there. I don't know what he's doing or not doing specifically. I can tell you that he definitely upholds those of us that are fighting for what is right. And I think a lot of us lean on that knowledge, but he is very, very near to this.
How would you describe your relationship? Do you feel his presence? Do you hear his voice?
Yeah. So I've always felt his presence ever since I was a little girl. I think it's interesting because he's a complex individual. Use the word individual. He's complex because he's got a lot of aspects of him that are sort of Abba Father, meaning that fatherly, I want to climb in your lap and be comforted feeling. And there is the God in the Bible, the God of vengeance and the God of war and the God of justice. So he's complex, and I believe he relates to all of us on our level, how we see him, how we need to see him. A lot of times that's affected by our own earthly father relationships, whether for good or for bad, sadly. But I do feel a presence of God always. One thing that's interesting is that often in the hardest times, the teacher is quiet during the test. So I found in my life that it's important to lean into the relationship. We have relationships with people. If you don't spend time with them, if you don't talk to them, if you don't let them talk to you, you don't really get to know them. And if you don't get to know them, you won't really know if that is their voice or somebody else's voice. You won't really understand their character. So I think you have to spend time with God to understand his voice. So when you hear it, which I'll talk about in a moment, that's him, not someone else, that you can make decisions in your life in a way that you believe he would want you to based on his character, that you have some understanding of purpose. And I think all of that comes with the sacrifice of time being spent. Be still and know that I am God and hear my voice. So, we do that in times where I think we forget to sometimes when we don't need him. But then when we need him, right, that, we haven't invested, then we're like, God, where are you? He's always there. I just think he knows exactly what we need and when we need it. And sometimes when things are really dark, sometimes it feels like the heavens are brass, like you can't get through, but he's there. He just knows exactly in what way he needs to be there. And sometimes we just have to have that faith, and that faith that shows him that we believe it. So I do hear his voice. The way I hear his voice is it's impressed upon me. And sometimes I have to say, okay, is that him, or did I just think that, or is that an external force? Because external evil forces will speak to you as well. I mean, how many times have you had a thought that you're like, okay, I can't think that. That's not a good thought, right? You got to fight your thoughts. And sometimes it just comes from our flesh because we're, humans are weak and we're stuck in our past, or we're dealing with whatever issues. And, we see the world the way we want to through our own pain and our hurts. And so a lot of times what we think is the voice of God is just our flesh saying something, or our ego keeping us safe. Sometimes it's our enemy, whatever forces those are against us that want us to believe a certain way. I think his voice is constant. It's that still small voice. It's that urging. It's that comfort. It's something that builds you up. It guides and directs you, but it's never one that chides you or humiliates you or says you keep making mistakes. It's always one that looks out for your best, but in a way tries to be that wisdom to direct, right? So you try to listen to that. So yes, I hear his voice, and I think anybody can. You just have to spend time with him. And I wish I could spend more time. I've got 4 teenagers and 4 businesses and all kind of things we're going to talk about. And that gets in the way of relationship, including with our God. So I think that's something that's hard for us in modern society, right? We're just go, 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 go. It doesn't leave a lot of time.
So if you had the ability or the opportunity to rearrange your life to make more time to talk to God, what would that look like? Going to church more often, going to the woods more often? What would that
Yeah.
be?
More of the woods, whatever that looks like, more of the ocean, more. What it would look like for me is more quiet time. Now, I'm super type A, and he made me that way, and he knows that. I mean, my husband would tell you I'm like type AAA. I don't know if that exists. I have a hard time not doing. So if I have a hard time not doing, that means I have a hard time shutting down my thoughts. And so there are a lot of people who use meditation. It's interesting. Meditation as it is today, I think for most people, the secular form of it requires an emptiness of your mind. And that's sort of the goal, right? Empty out your mind. I find that impossible. And then I started to research what meditation really is scripturally. And my worldview is to look at things through the word of God as best I can, because that's how I decide right, wrong. How am I going to make this decision? What does he think about this? So when I look at meditation, I look at that and I say, that's interesting. It was really his word first. And if you go back to the Old Testament, and I think it's in the Torah part, he talks about meditating, but he talks about meditating on his word. He never says empty your mind, because an empty mind is an invitation for who knows what to come in. So I don't think our goal is to empty our mind. I think our goal is to direct our thoughts. So for me, being closer to him is, in an ideal world, I would have more time in the morning or whatever to be in a place that's quiet. Maybe it's music sometimes, maybe it's nothing. but I have never been able to get that empty mind. And then when I realized it was such a breakthrough for me, I'm like, I don't have to achieve that. I just need to focus on the things he cares about. And so then what would that look like, and what does that look like when I can do it, is to focus on his words, because his words have life. And so whatever I need in the moment, wherever I'm at, those words are power, and they have life, and they impart life. And I think when you do that in the morning and you meditate on powerful words, it changes the entire day for you. Doesn't mean you're not going to have a tough day. Doesn't mean you don't know what you're facing, but it sets you up. So, Steve, I would love it if my life afforded that every single morning, but I'm going to be honest, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I do that every single morning, because I don't. I wish I could, but I don't. And I think we have to stop waiting for that moment when we can. I think prayer is almost something that we just have an ongoing conversation with God. And I've realized that too. So you sort of start to feel like, oh my gosh, I didn't spend enough time meditating on his word, or I didn't sit quietly. Well, maybe I can't, like legitimately I can't, because I've got all the things. But there is an ongoing conversation that you can have with God. And I think that's a form of prayer. And I have that all day long. I feel like I talk to him all day long. We have this conversation, and maybe it's me trying to figure things out. Maybe it's whatever. Maybe it's music I play that makes me think about him in a certain way. When you're in love with someone, you think about them all day long in different ways. You're not always physically next to them. So I think that we're hard on ourselves. I think that we who want a closer relationship with God sometimes feel like in this world and in the pressures that seem to be mounting, not getting easier, that it's harder to find that. So we have to look at it maybe a little differently and say, maybe you're talking to him all day long and he shows up in little ways and gives direction and gives warning and gives exhortation and all the things that you need.
I get that. Does all this leave you optimistic? I mean, when at the end of the day, however you define the end, will it be a good ending?
I always say I've read the last chapter and we win. So that's good. However, we were not promised a rose garden, right? I look at history, and there are plenty of times in history where people went through really difficult things, and maybe they didn't get out of them. Maybe they died in those circumstances, right? Certainly so many stories of individuals, but also just cultures or times in history where it's dark. So I think we have to be careful what our expectation is. I'm very optimistic because I believe that God has blessed us. And I believe that he wants for us to bring forth the things that he wants in this world. And I think that our country, I don't divide it, Steve. I don't divide politics from spirituality. I don't divide any of that, because I've seen even more over the past 5 years how totally intertwined it is. So I'm very optimistic because I think by nature, I know that in the end, I'm good. But I don't know what that path looks like to get there. And so I have to fight for the things that I believe are right. And so that I can look myself in the mirror and say, I did it, and there's a saying in the Bible that talks about finally going to heaven, and God says, well done, good and faithful servant. Now, what did that servant go through? You and I both know there are some pretty tough stories out there of people that have really sacrificed. So I don't know what that looks like for me. I don't know what I'll go through, but I do know I want to walk out my purpose, and that's my passion. So I'm optimistic, but I'm also sort of sober-minded, knowing that if my purpose is what he intends, it's not all going to be butterflies and rainbow. I know he'll give me what I need to walk through that. And I know that if I can just help one other person along the way, if I can leave some sort of mark, then I will have done that. I just want to know what it is he has for me to do. And I don't want anything to get in the way of that. I want to do that no matter how hard it is some days. And that's my wish for you and for everyone else, that you discover purpose. This country was founded with purpose, vision. Without vision, my people perish. You have to have vision vision associated with your purpose. You may not always understand it all, but you have to wake up every day with a vision. So that's my desire, that I figure that out, and that my kids figure that out, and the people around me figure that out. And that's always been my view on mindset and all the things that I do, that it's attached to purpose, which is a godly principle, because God creates with purpose, right? When a manufacturer makes something, when somebody manufactures something, there's purpose behind it. Every piece of it has a reason and a purpose. Things are not designed in a vacuum with no purpose and application. Well, we are better than things, so we have purpose, and there's a reason you are the way you are. There's a reason I am the way I am. And don't you want to know? Don't you want, in this short little life you have, don't you want to find that out?
Yeah. But as you're saying, there's a price to pay, and it's in terms of sacrifice. How are you defining sacrifice, and what kind of sacrifices should people be prepared to make?
That's such a good question. So sacrifice could be any number of things. One thing I always say to people when we talk about the current fight that we're in, and sort of the state of the nation and the state and all that, is that you look around you and there are a lot of people trying to do a lot of things that are good. But where it gets tough is that people are just upset, but they don't do anything. They don't sacrifice. So right now, everyone has been given a measure of time, a measure of talent, and a measure of treasure by God. So you've been given a certain amount of time, meaning you shouldn't sacrifice your family, right? You should have your priorities in check, but you do have a certain measure of time. You've been given talent. You have unique talent that I don't have, and vice versa. You've been given characteristics and things that you do very easily. You also have a measure of treasure, whatever that is. And, however you've stewarded that, you have a measure of that. So the first sacrifice is, what in each of those three areas are you willing to sacrifice towards the result that you want? So if you're very concerned about the direction of this country, and you're very concerned about what's happening in your town, in your state, whatever it is that you get passionate about, what measure of each of those three areas are you willing to sacrifice towards it? Because if you look in someone's checkbook, you'll know what's in their heart. If you look at where someone spends most of their time, you'll know what they care about. If you look at the gifts you've been given, you would hope they're being used for the things that matter. So it's different for everybody. And I would never put on somebody, whatever, but my dad always raised me to say he was a successful businessman, entrepreneur, who started with nothing, and, went through all the things you go through as a business owner, the ups and downs. But ultimately, he would always say to me, listen, we need businessmen and women to fund the things that need to happen to protect this country. And that was always taught to me on the finance side. And then I saw my parents modeling time that they spent and invested, right? And then I, of course, saw the same with whatever their gifts were. So this was impressed upon me as a young kid, and that it's almost our spiritual duty to give back what God has given. He says that he only wants 10%. That's not bad. I get to keep 90. He wants 10, however that looks. So I can use 90% of my talents in my business, 10% for his stuff. For me, it's all kind of together. But yes, that's the first part of sacrifice: time, treasure, and talent. And look at yourself and say, what am I doing in those areas? And am I where I need to be? No one can tell you except you. That's between you and God. And it's important. Now, it's interesting when we look at the forces against us, especially politically, for decades now, especially when it comes to money, they have outraised us, outspent us, because we've been living our lives as good Americans, raising our kids, building our businesses. Meanwhile, in the dark recess corners, Marxism is, getting into our school system. The economic factors are forcing dual income families. So all of a sudden the parents aren't paying attention, and all of a sudden there's more economic pressure. And so they're starting to infiltrate more and more and more, and they have the money to do it because we're distracted. And we haven't either had the organizations or been giving to the organizations to counter that. So those days are over. We got to give, we got to create, we've got to counter, we've got to match what they're doing with light that they're doing with darkness.
I see. Makes sense. So when you're talking about sacrifice, on the one hand, it sounds like we have to do without something, but you're also mentioning we were given these by God in the first place. We were given the talent, we were given the treasures, we were given the time. So in a way, we're giving back what he gave to us. So it's
Yeah.
not necessarily a net loss on our part. Does that make sense?
I don't think whenever you give, again, spiritual laws are very important to me, as you can tell. Whatever you give is never a loss. God always multiplies. He's in the multiplication business. So we know that a law of God is that what you give, you shall receive tenfold, right? Flowing over. We know it's even like what you sow, you reap. It's a law of nature. It's a law of God. It's how our universe works on all these laws. So you never lose when you give, you only gain. And I think people don't get that. And once you have that breakthrough knowledge, it really sets you free that whatever you invest in, you receive back. Now, that's not just money, it's also helping people, whatever. So what you give, you shall receive. So yes, it may feel like a sacrifice, but God always replenishes and he always does it at a higher level. And I think too that you can't forget how unique and important you are as an individual and how your presence on this earth is not random and the timing is not random. So sometimes when I look at my 4 kids, sometimes I do get a little bit sad. I'm going to be honest. I'm not floating on a cloud all the time, right? Sometimes I get a little bit sad that this is the generation they were born into. That are they really going to have the childhood? And they didn't really have the childhood that I have. I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. And yes, there were issues back then. I remember the gas lines. I remember the threat of the USSR, but I also remember like Reagan and all the shining city on the hill, and just I don't know, I had a great childhood and I've had freedom that you don't have now. So sometimes I'm sad and I say, well, why didn't they have that? Even my kids will say to me, I wish I had your childhood. But then I remember and God catches me and he says, they were born at this time. And you know the story of Esther. For such a time as this is a very important concept. If we remember that we're not random, that we are given purpose and gifts and talents, and we were put on this earth in this specific family, in this specific place for a specific time, then we have to embrace that and say, but God knew. And for such a time as this, I think is a critical understanding. I think that story, while it's completely factual and true and historic and important to the history of the Jewish people and what happened to them, if you just take Esther specifically and say, this is someone who is not any different than you and I, but she just said yes to something. If not her, maybe someone else would have been used, but it was her. So all of that, all the things in her life led up to that moment where she decided to be used. And she ended up saving, she never would have thought that. She ended up saving an entire group of people. So I have to look at that and then I say those days where I feel like, what are my kids facing? Like what's going to happen in the next 2 decades? Are they even going to have a chance at the American dream? And God knows. And God had them specifically born at such a time as this, and they have specific gifts and talents. So now I got to help them figure out what they are, and they need to see the bigger picture and understand no matter how dark it feels, the light gets lighter. And there is, you can't compare, right? You just can't. Comparison is the thief of joy. We can compare all day long. I wish I was born this. I wish I was this. I wish I was that. You're not. And God knew, and God wants for all to prosper. So yeah, so that for me, I think the story of Esther is super important for people to understand and embrace and personalize.
Is that your legacy? Do you want to be remembered, or one of the more important things remembered as the person to help people find their inner Esther, or take that perspective, like, their significance to me being here at this time, at this place?
Yeah.
Is that how you want to be
Yes,
remembered?
I think I'll take that. I think more broadly, I wrote a book called Master Your Mindset, The Master's Way, and it talks about mindset, and it's based on scripture. It talks about how our mindset works. The reason I did that is because then you can find the limiting beliefs that hold you back. And once you've found those limiting beliefs and you heal those, then you can start to discover purpose. And then purpose leads to great meaning. So then it leads to what you're saying. So yes, my heart's cry, if you strip it all away, is that everyone find their purpose, that they conquer their limiting beliefs, that they figure out why they were created. And I think sometimes when people hear that, they think, well, I mean, if I'm not president, if I didn't cure cancer, if I don't, no, it's not drama. It's not always some dramatic role. We are part of such a bigger picture that we each have to play our role. And I have to tell you, you may not find the cure for cancer, but if you find your purpose and you help somebody out in their time of need because you're acting in your purpose and out of your gifts and talents, you don't even know the butterfly effect, the stone in the pond, so to speak, of what you've done in their life, and therefore what they may do in someone else's life. And I think when we get to heaven, we're going to see those interconnections, and we're going to be blown away by that, by like, wow, all I did was this, and look what it did, right? And we don't have the capacity mentally to understand that here. So then your prayer every day is, okay, God, help me do today what you want me to do. Help me see things the way you see them. Help me use my gifts and my talents and my time, treasure, and talent in the way you want me to. Help me change one person's life today. And it doesn't have to just shake the world. It doesn't have to be an earthquake. It can be that one thing. I don't know if you've ever been standing in a checkout line and you look at somebody and you feel the need to just say hello to them, how are you, or give them a compliment. Or I don't think we can understate the small things in that regard. So in a big way, yes, my desire is that everyone walk out their purpose. But in order to do that, they have to understand how God created them and how limiting beliefs hold them back. In order to do that, they have to understand how mindset works and how limiting beliefs are in control, and they have been since Adam and Eve, and how unless you overcome those, you really can't find your purpose. So that is the essence of, I think, what I bring broadly to this earth and what I care about.
And I'll tell you, if people understood that, then they'd be able to reject the naysaying, fear-mongering, the world is going to end tomorrow unless you do what I say type stuff. So, Elizabeth, I want to thank you. Your message is so central to what we're trying to do. You've articulated it so well with such passion, and you've done us a great service by sharing that. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. It was so fun to talk to you. We talked about something I didn't even expect, and I love that. And I'm sure all these interviews put together are going to be a tapestry of amazing people that God has created, and the future is bright.
I mean, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.